Hello again, everyone. Welcome to the HireMyVA Team and Business Building Podcast, brought to you by Ugozi.com. And in this podcast and at HireMyVA, we help you to reclaim your freedom through hiring and thriving with virtual assistants without breaking the bank. And as you've heard before, your bank. And I'm Dave Braun. I'm here with Larry Broughton, my partner in all things coaching, great business mentor, coaching me in life. And Larry, we're brothers going through all these life's up and downs. Tell everybody hi.
I don't know, that one registered for me, man. Yes, there are life's ups and downs, for sure. Handsome Dave, it's good to see you. I'm glad that we're talking about this topic today. Yeah, life's ups and downs. Boy, we ought to talk about that someday. How do you keep moving forward? You know, the image I always use is like just put one dusty, bloody boot in front of the other. Sometimes that's what it feels like, right?
Yeah, it does.
It does. Keep moving forward. So, hey, we did, this is part 2 of an interesting topic. So why don't you share with us what we're going to be talking about today?
Okay. So the question for today is, and it's part 2, we're episode 127, and we're talking about how do I create psychological safety? That's the question. So as Larry mentioned, this is part 2. Go back to part 1, which is episode 126. We talk a little bit more about what psychological, God, I can't even say that. That's for sure. What psychological safety is and why it's important. So go back to that and listen to the details. But one thing to remember is we talked about the main kind of definition of it is that where people have a sense of confidence, the team will not embarrass, reject, or punish someone for speaking up. Now, one of the things I want to say about that is this is a sense of confidence, not from you as a team leader, if you are, but the sense of confidence from the people within it. So now that sense is based on who knows exactly what it is. It could be based on a feeling. It could be based on evidence, but there may be evidence to the contrary. The thing is that people will have a sense, and that's what you have to address. The perception is real. Sometimes it doesn't match the data, but the perception may still be there.
It's so important. And I'm just going to give a little bit of a disclaimer. Again, as Dave said, go back and listen to the other. This is one of those ones where it really is important that you listen to the first one, because we give a lot of disclaimers about that. A lot of words have become politically charged in recent years. And when we talk about psychological safety in the workspace, we're not talking about safe places. Okay. And when we use the word of diversity of thought, we're not talking about, what's the word I'm looking for? Squelching other people. Thank you. Squelching other people's ideas, but encouraging diverse ideas. That's what we're talking about here. And Dave, while you were talking, yes, I was focusing, but it did remind me, I just had a call with one of our clients this morning, and he's done a really good job of bringing team members on board, where now he's created such a culture where the team members are almost, don't want to use the word policing, but policing themselves, setting accountabilities for their own self. And if people aren't participating, team members are encouraging the other team members to participate. How awesome is that? But he's been actively doing this for over a year. It's taken a while to get there. But when your team members start taking charge of building the culture around it, boy, you've really made some progress. Instead of us as the leader, the business owner, always doing it, but team members are putting up accountability boundaries that, hey, you're here, you're on the team. What do you have to say about this? How awesome would that be, right?
Oh yeah, that's nirvana from a team perspective in a lot of ways. Right. I mean, you hit on one of the techniques, I think, and we didn't even have this in our notes, I think, but one of the techniques is just giving them permission, right? Give them permission to speak up. Like you said, encourage them to do those things. Encourage them to behave without you. Encourage them to make the step without you.
Yeah. There you go. Good. All right.
Well, for psychological safety, one of the things we talked about the last one is team members don't need to be friends, but they do need to be socially sensitive, and people need to, especially the leader, is got to ensure everyone feels heard. So there's, a way that could be done. For example, Amy Edmonson, she's a PhD researcher at Harvard. She said, and here's the quote: "When the leader goes out of their way to make someone feel listened to, or starts a meeting by saying, 'I might miss something, so I need all of you to watch for my mistakes,' or they say, 'Jim, you haven't spoken for a while. What do you think?' That makes a huge difference."
Yeah.
So you want to expand on that, Larry, or?
No, I think it's a pretty good description, actually. It's always important to set the tone for the meeting right out of the gate.
Yes.
Basically you're laying ground rules for it, right? Hey, here's what we expect to get out of this thing. I'd like everyone to participate, bring your own ideas. We talked about it in the previous episode. But encourage diversity of thought, encourage different ideas to come out. But it's an investment in time. It can be a much more efficient if you just come in and are draconian in your approach.
Yeah.
Right. And shutting people down, but that's only for short-term success. You will not have long-term success with that.
And your organization is always going to depend upon you then, because if you're being draconian and giving all of the orders, barking them all the time, what happens when you disappear for a little bit? Your team members won't know what to do.
Well, this is where it's so important for team leaders to really be a leader. And some of the most effective, inspiring leaders that I can think of have been great at being the role model. They show how it is to be an active listener, right? They're socially sensitive to the group. That is vital for a team leader. As Amy had mentioned in her question here, is if you see someone who's kind of being a wallflower and leaning back and really not participating, don't call them out and say, "Hey, Dave, why are you being such a slug?" But say, "Dave, this is an area of expertise that you might have had some experience in the past. Remember that? Can you share that with us?" Get them engaged there, right? And so you've got to really be scanning the room and be asking for, well, let me back up. One of the things I like to remind myself is I'd rather have brutal honesty than beautiful lies, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so oftentimes in these meetings, you do see a little bit of posturing from some team members, that if someone who they think is the leader, they're just blowing smoke and brown nosing is what we used to call it. I don't want that kind of thing. I'd rather have people who are bringing out diverse ideas. So I think leaders have to do that. And so you do that by inviting people to speak up, particularly if you see someone who's, you got to watch body language. There's somebody sitting there with their eyebrows pointing down, their arms crossed, shoulders up. It's time to engage that person. You can say, hey, Larry, tell me what's going on in your head right now. Don't say, "Hey, you look like a grouch," but say, "What's going through your head? What problems do you see with this idea that we're talking about right now?" Right? Don't turn your back to that person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But really engage them, invite them to speak in. But this is one of the challenges, Dave, that I see so often, is that oftentimes leaders are afraid to talk about what are they feeling, what emotions is it evoking right now. When really what we do when we say, "Hey, this is making me feel a little bit weird out or creepy," or "I'm not sure that this is the direction we ought to be going because it kind of goes against our core values." When the leader speaks that way, it's giving permission to the other team members to do this. And again, this is an investment in time. This is an investment in creativity. It's an investment in future innovation when you create environments like this. And you'll be able to survive more than just the next economic cycle or the next P&L. Right?
Yeah, and often we are not naturally going to be good at that. No, oftentimes, Larry, the last thing I want to do when I have a meeting with my team is to go back and sit back and say, this just doesn't feel quite right. Or it's easy to say, "This feels really good." It's harder to say, "It just doesn't feel right." Or "There's something that I'm not getting here. I'm not quite sure. Could you explain more?" That's a little bit harder for me.
Well, it is, but I wanted to say this earlier and it slipped my mind. So before I forget, you don't run all meetings this way.
Yeah.
There are some meetings where it is, you get in and you get out. It's basically a status and an update meeting. I'm talking more problem solving, big picture meetings, we're doing this kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, in these types of meetings, I guess everyone has about the same amount of clout, the same amount of input. No one is really left out. That's the ideal in these things.
Yeah.
There are other meetings where you are going to have a team member who's just a fly on the wall because they're just absorbing information, right? You can't run every meeting like this. But if it is a problem solving or a strategic meeting or a brainstorming session, that's what, or an AAR, an after action review.
Yeah, there you go.
They need to be run this way. But one of the keys, Dave, that I think a leader has to make sure that they aren't doing and they're not allowing other team members to do is to interrupt someone when they're in the flow of thought. So someone is brainstorming this brilliant idea. They've got the guts, they've got the courage to express something that most people aren't talking about. And so that's a stupid idea. They don't let them speak. You've got to really be a moderator. Some of the most effective moderators know when to step in and redirect the conversation, but you can't let other team members hijack other people's thoughts. Make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Let me go back to a point that you said. I want to ask you a question here because
don't put me on the spot, Dave.
Because I want to see if you think that we can do this. So one of the things that I like to do in our team meetings is, we have them on a weekly basis, usually on Monday, is we have some type of a learning time. And it's usually, it could be we watch a YouTube video or something, and then we talk about it, but then we go through a status and all that. So it's kind of like a mixture of a meeting where there's the status as well as learning and brainstorming. Do you think that that's really a good way to approach it? Or do you think that we should just say, okay, we're going to do all the status in the meeting where it's like what you talked about, we just report and then switch over or have a totally separate meeting to where you're brainstorming and trying to elicit a lot of input and solve issues and things like that? Do you think could be a mixture or not? What do you think?
I think it just depends. It's what works for the team.
Okay.
It just depends on what's going on. I can see how some days people are chomping at the bit. Like my schedule is absolutely blown up today. I need to get back to this. So it could be frustrating for someone if you're doing a 45-minute teaching session versus a 4 to 5 minute teaching session, right? So it does depend. And I would ask the team members, is this effective for you guys? What would you prefer to do, right? What's most effective? So I've seen it done both ways. In the military, we used to call those pocket teachings. You got a few minutes downtime, and then all the NCOs, non-commissioned officers, would have a couple of topics that they could just teach on spur of the moment. Hey, we got an extra 15 minutes. Let me do this pocket teaching for you, right?
Okay.
So I think it's a great idea. I like that idea. It's another conversation I just had with somebody this morning. We don't do enough professional development and training in organizations. And so that you do that, I think it's really commendable, because we know, right, from a bunch of surveys that have been done, that one of the reasons people leave organizations is they don't feel like they're being professionally developed.
Yeah.
Right. But we expect all these things from them, but they're not being trained on how to do it. So I think it's an interesting idea. Yeah, why not? And if you've created an environment, Dave, there is some psychological safety, and you ask them, hey, is this the best use of your time? Hopefully they're going to give you the honest feedback.
Yeah, that's a good idea, is to take the pulse of the team every so often and say, hey, we've been running the meeting like this. We've been putting up 5 minutes here, 10 minutes here of learning or whatever. Is this working for you, or is there another way that could help you facilitate learning? Is there a better approach? So yeah, and I think we talk about that technique as a leader, is asking people's opinions, and then so Larry, when I'm doing that in my staff meeting, it's like I need to ask every single person that's on the staff meeting, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think?
Dave, I think that's really good, and you should share that, what the results are, I think, with folks, because right, we're always looking at what are other organizations doing that we can learn from, and maybe you can go into that. There's that Google thing that you shared with me before, that Laszlo guy.
Yeah.
What was his name?
Yeah,
Brock,
it's
something. Bach. Am I
who
right?
knows? Yeah,
Am
yeah,
I?
yeah. I'm just laughing. It's fun. So yeah, Laszlo Bock. I mean, it comes from some of the books that we've talked about, Smarter, Faster, Better. We've referred to that before, but he quotes Laszlo Bock. He's the head of the People Operations Department at Google,
That's
and
right.
talking about um, his work, where I mean, they just looked at teams over and over and found out what caused teams to be really high performing
Yeah.
versus non-high performing. And he said, quote, the biggest thing you should take away from this work is that how teams work matters in a lot of ways more than who is on them. So in other
Right.
words, it's what we talked about last time with the lion and the sheep, is
Yeah.
you can take a team of average performers, and if you teach them to interact the right way, they'll do things no superstar could ever accomplish.
Yeah. So the line, if you have not taken our instructions and gone to listen to the previous episode first, what Dave was talking about, the lion and the sheep, is Alexander the Great had a great quote that said that an army of sheep led by a lion is better than an army of lions led by a sheep.
Mm.
So that's how that kind of ties in with what you're talking about there. Yeah, I
And
think that he's right regarding these average performers, right?
yeah, and here's one of the key points. We talk about the safety and people all having a voice and all that.
Yeah.
But one of the things that's important that he points out, he says it's not about consensus. In other words, not everybody in the room has got to, at the end of your meeting,
No,
whatever problem you're trying to solve, agree on what the direction is. This is what's going to happen. But they all need to feel like they have a voice,
for
because
sure.
that way, the next time it comes around, the next problem is their voice may be the one that creates that the solution.
Yeah. 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 I think that that's really important. Groupthink is a really scary idea, and you see this
Mm,
sometimes, right? And so sometimes it is the odd voice out that really creates the innovation, right? Think Elon Musk, for instance. Boy, he could have just followed a bunch of groupthink. And yeah, doing a privately held rocket company is really a bad idea because NASA's, it's always been government funded, right? Where would that have led? Or who's going to do an electric car? They've tried electric cars before and they don't work, and they're slow and they're clunky and they're not very good looking, right?
mm,
Why do it? He's the odd thinker, right? And then you got to get together a bunch of other odd thinkers, right? So don't be afraid to stay away from consensus. Right?
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So he goes on and he says, let's like you said, let's remember it's not about consensus. It's not about a high volume of work or physical location. Those things didn't make the best performing teams. They say is what matters is everyone having a voice and some social sensitivity. We talked about it, and of course that they actually feel that social sensitivity, that psychological safety.
Well, again, I'm gonna poke a fork in this just to remind folks when we're talking about social sensitivity in this impact or in this context, we're not talking about shutting down other ideas. It's making sure that people aren't left out, encouraging people to
Yes.
speak up. Just because this is one of the things I think a lot of I refer a lot to the military because that's where a lot of my experience came from. But sometimes if you're a private in the Army, you're afraid to speak up because there's a sergeant in the room, right? Um, what you have to do is say, hey, we're just trying to get ideas here. So I don't care whether you're black, white, straight, gay, transgender, whatever, identify as an ape. I don't care. I want ideas here, right? And so you have to actively speak it out loud that you're looking for ideas. And then you have to act on it. You can't shut ideas down because you don't like them. If you ask for creative ideas, you need to accept creative ideas. That doesn't mean you're going to implement them,
Mm-hmm.
right? But you got to make sure that everyone has a voice. And yeah, you got to make sure that folks have a voice and that they feel like they're being heard.
Yeah. So when somebody gives their solution or their thought, acknowledging it and saying thank you for it goes a long way. So he talks about 5 key norms for some of these high performing teams.
Okay.
And Larry, we've touched on a lot of these in some of the podcasts, and we touched a lot about it in the victory training.
So what's he say?
So he says, number 1, people must believe their work is important.
Oh, yeah.
Right. We talk about that, having a vision and a mission for your company and core values, and making sure that your team understands them and agrees with them.
Yeah. And I think this is one of those areas where people are like, hey, I want to be happy all the time. People perform beyond their own expectations when they know that that their work has meaning, or their efforts have meaning from it. And that transcends money. Sometimes if they feel like, hey, my effort is really, it plays this role in the organization, they become real contributors to the team.
And,
so they got to feel that their work is important. I agree with that.
And as leaders, it's our responsibility to make sure that they understand it, point out all kinds of examples. Like in our team meeting, we talk about our vision or mission or core values, a portion of that every single meeting. And then we also will mention how we are accomplishing that. We'll mention a client. We'll mention how we're actually making a difference, that we actually are in a client's life.
Yeah. That's
good. And so once people recognize that client, they see that, then they'll remember, okay, yeah, that I did some of that work for that client. And so they'll realize that it's meaningful. But as leaders, we just have to continue to emphasize that.
Okay.
One of the things that's, that I find that leaders don't do is they're constantly going to the next problem, and never talking about, hey, we solved a problem for a client. We did some great things for somebody.
I'm guilty of that.
We all are, because people who are very successful in life are what? Problem solvers. So we naturally want to solve problems. So what we have to do is make it a habit. We talk about habits and how to create them, but create an environment where it almost forces you as a leader to do that. It's like, that's why I have an agenda for my team meetings.
That's why I remember doing
Otherwise,
a meme.
I'd forget.
I remember doing a meme, like on my social media, I do all these different memes. Right? I remember one of them from years ago was like, problem solvers are exalted. They are, right? Everyone wants their problems to be solved. And I forget personally as well. I forget to remind us, hey, here's the victories that we have. Here's the problems that we have solved. Here's the good that we're doing as well.
Yeah. We have to force ourselves to remember. It doesn't happen naturally for most of us.
Yeah.
Okay. So those 5 key norms. Number 1, they must believe their work is important. Number 2, must feel their work is meaningful. Number 3 is must have clear goals and defined roles. So that's really important. And we can go into detail on that in another episode, but having
it's pretty self-explanatory, I think.
Yeah. What are people responsible in their position in your company? Number 4 is they need to know that they can depend upon each other. In other words,
that's a hard one, Dave.
Yeah. How do you? Yeah, that is. Go ahead and tell me more, Larry.
No, I just think that there are so many. I not among your organization or mine necessarily, but we hear it from so many clients and the folks that we've done some consulting for, is that there are adversarial roles that build between individuals and sometimes departments in organizations. And there are some leaders who kind of thrive on creating that
unhealthy
competition, right? And which can be good, but the ugly side of when that manifests is that they don't feel like anyone's got their back.
Yeah.
We've seen it when there are some team members that actually undermine each other. And that's terrible. There is a certain level of healthy competition, I think, among salespeople and that kind of thing, that is actually healthy sometimes. But when you actually have team members that are working against each other, that's a culture that is destined for failure.
Yeah. And then the last one, I'm going to touch on that in a second, but the last one of the norms is the psychological safety that we talked about. And we're going to talk about some of the techniques to create psychological safety here in a second.
Okay.
But oftentimes, Larry, one of the things that we tend not to do when we're trying to be successful or learn something is we don't look at examples of when people are not successful. And so what I'm thinking on this, and tell me if you agree, great example that of people not successful when it comes to psychological safety is look at our political arena. People express an opinion, and even if it, they say troll, get out of here, you're stupid, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So take what's going on in the political world and don't do that stuff.
Right.
That's the number one tip, right?
Yeah. Don't do it.
Yeah. So let's talk about a few things that we can do to model some of these behaviors. So number one is we talked about don't interrupt teammates during conversations.
So important.
Now, there's a caveat to this, and I've done this before, is when you sense, let's say you're in a meeting and you're doing problem solving, but it's so obvious that the person either doesn't solve the problem or they're going down the wrong direction, and they tend to continue to talk and talk and talk.
Yeah.
Well, then you've got to be gentle. You're going to have to jump in.
Well, I think I mentioned this in the previous podcast, Dave, in part one of this, is that our role sometimes has to be as a moderator, right? Moderators don't call people idiots because they've gone down the wrong path. It's like, hey, that's a great conversation piece for maybe that needs to fit into our next meeting. There's a way to corral someone back in.
Yeah.
During that, what I'm talking about when I say don't interrupt them is just because you disagree with someone, you interrupt them.
Yeah. You say, no, it'd be like, no, don't even finish your thought, Larry, because you're wrong.
Yeah. So what does that do to the other person?
Shuts them down.
Shuts them down. They feel disrespected, right? If it's someone who's not a fighter, right? If it's someone who's a fighter, you actually escalate and the fist go up, whether literally or figuratively, right? And they're fighting words, right?
Yeah. And I think
a better way to do it is to actually pose questions.
Yeah. And I think in the previous episode, I talked about that example where we had these two engineers who were going at each other, and it ended up escalating. Exactly like what you talked about.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, another point is demonstrate. So a team leader has got to demonstrate that they're listening by summarizing what people say after they said it.
So it's almost like active listening, you're saying.
Yeah.
What I hear you saying, Dave, is, right? Something along those lines.
Now, this is not drive-through listening.
No.
That's
the whole thing about active listening. It's like actually diving deep.
Yes.
On it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I like that.
Okay. The next one is team leaders should admit what they don't know.
Hey, if you don't admit it, your team member knows anyway.
Yeah.
Right? They do, or at least they have a sense of it. And I think if the team leader pretends they know, a couple things are going to happen. One is you lose credibility because they know anyway. But sometimes, and I've seen this happen before, is there will be someone who might be a little smarter than the team leader in that area, and they'll sharpshoot them in front of the team. It's called icon toppling. Right?
Yeah.
And they'll do what they can just to bring that person down a peg.
Yeesh.
Which is basically the idea that I win by you losing, and that's not a great recipe for success in teams.
Yeah, agree.
That's a good one, Dave. I like that.
So the next point is they shouldn't end a meeting until all team members have spoken at least once.
Wow. So that means that the moderator or the team leader needs to make sure that people are participating throughout the meeting.
Yeah, and I would say don't wait till the end to ask somebody.
That's right.
You better do it at the beginning, because obviously what'll happen at the end, they'll say, nope, I don't have anything else, because they'll probably want to go and exit and be done.
Right. But this also encourages us to make sure that we're controlling the amount of people that are in the meeting. What if you have 50 people in the meeting?
Oh, yeah, that's not the meeting we're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
The next point is they should encourage people who are upset to express their frustrations and encourage teammates to respond in non-judgmental ways.
Well, that's the idea that I was talking about earlier. If you see somebody who's sitting there with their brow furrowed and their arms crossed and they're slunched down, you better engage them, because they may not speak if they aren't given the opportunity to speak their piece there. Believe me, they're going to speak it afterwards.
Yeah,
sure.
and then as a team leader, if they're speaking it afterwards and you're not around, then you can't control it, or you
Exactly.
can't frame it or direct it into a something that could be positive.
Yeah. Good. What else do they say?
Okay, the team leaders' behavior is they call out intergroup conflicts and resolve them through open discussions.
Call out intergroup. That is really important, Dave.
Yeah, that takes courage, correct?
Man, it takes courage for sure, because it does mean that you're going to have to be, I keep using the word moderator, right? But you're also going to have to probably be a little bit of a peacekeeper. If you've got intergroup conflicts, people are sometimes more willing to dig their heels in for the sake and protection of the team and ideas, right? And boy, that's a whole podcast by itself, is like, how do you find common ground between these two? How you do it, right? You got to find common ground first. Can we agree on this?
Yeah.
Can we agree on this? Well, what if we were to move you by 5 degrees, move you by 5 degrees? That's the process, and that takes a skill. That takes some actual practice.
Yeah, it really does.
Okay.
I don't think I'm that good at it. You sound like you're pretty good at it.
Smoke and mirrors, baby.
I don't think so. All right. So the next one is team leaders will give others control.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think it's
of the meeting.
Yeah, I think there's no reason why you as a team leader have got to always be the one facilitating the meeting. I mean, you could be working with somebody else and say, Larry, why don't you take this one over?
Or this part of the meeting or something.
Yeah, or this part of the meeting, right? Let other people have practice and do it as well.
Yeah. You and I talked about this with some of your team members when it came to leading client meetings.
Yeah.
They would join you, and they would go into this. They would intentionally, you said, okay, watch me how I do this. And then you'd give them an opportunity to run part of the meeting. And then they would run part of the meeting with you there before you set them free to do it on their own.
That's right. Yep.
You got to be intentional about this, I guess.
You do. And of course, I mean, this goes without saying. The last one is like, be engaged. And if you're a team leader and you're coming into the team meeting and you're the one who's got your arms crossed, or you're all, talking on your phone, or you're, working on your computer and you're not engaged. Oh my gosh. That's like one of the worst behaviors you can have of all.
Exactly. Yeah.
I know some people, when they have meetings in a corporate environment, they'll say, don't even bring your phones with you. Don't bring your laptops, or at least put your phones on silent and keep them in your pocket.
Yeah.
But team leader has got to not only be engaged, but work to help everybody else be engaged too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, one of the final things that I think, Larry, we want to talk about is this type of creating psychological safety. Depending upon the culture that you're working with, you may have a lot more effort to get that created than other cultures. So in other words, like Filipino VAs, and we advocate using Filipino virtual assistants, right?
For folks here in the US. Yeah.
Yeah. For folks here in the US. And Larry, they, as a general rule, this has been my experience, and I think your experience as well, is you've really got to work to get them to feel comfortable to tell you, as well as other people on the team, their thoughts, their ideas, because I don't know if it's a culture thing, or it's because they've had different bosses or leaders who haven't led and said, you do this, this, and this, and that's all I want to hear from you. Just get your stuff done. And if I want your ideas, I'll ask for them.
Yeah.
It could be some of that.
Yeah. I think that that's not just a Filipino thing. I do think that it's across all here in the US, it happens as well. There are some folks, and I suppose it does. I mean, we've had both Filipino VAs and Filipino full-time team members at our hotels, but I can think of a lot of folks who are just afraid that if they bring up a different opinion, or if they make a mistake, they feel like they're going to lose their job.
Yes.
Right. And so unless you are intentional about creating the culture, it's like, hey, we want diversity of ideas because that's how we're going to innovate and change and come up with, new creative, whatever it is, products, solutions, whatever it is. We need those types of things. But you need, as a leader, you have to intentionally say, you will not lose your job for making a mistake. You will not lose your job if you can come up with a different opinion, as long as you're direct and respectful and you don't hide the results of it. You will lose your job if you keep making the same mistake over and over again.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Or there could be consequences. Right. But we encourage it. We absolutely encourage it. But people still aren't going to believe it until they see it happen.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone does make a mistake, or someone does have a significant failure, or if you make a mistake, you shouldn't hide from it either. You should share it. Hey, we made, and you can even say, hey, instead of going to the meeting and say, hey, Dave really screwed up last week, you can say, hey, we tried this. We found out these were the results. And so here's how we corrected it along the way. And people say, somebody made a mistake and they survived and they're still here. Oh my gosh, maybe I can do that too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You have to actually celebrate those learning opportunities, I guess.
There is something, and I don't know what it is, because I saw it in my previous company. I've seen it in my team. I see it in somebody really close to me or company, that just by default, they feel, just by default, and I don't know what happens, but just by default, they feel like if they say something out of order, they challenge somebody, that they're going to get fired.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. So we as leaders have got to go out of our way to create it, because if we don't go out of our way to create it, it's not going to happen. Yeah. It just doesn't happen. The default is people being guarded and afraid to say something. Sure. That's the default behavior of everybody. Yeah. We have to go out of our way to create psychological safety.
Yeah, for sure.
We do.
For sure. Good.
Okay. Anything else?
I think we went pretty deep on that. And I would just remind people, go back and listen to episode 1. If you've got episode 1, the first part of this conversation regarding psychological safety, this is an interesting topic to me. I'd love to hear if people have ideas on how to incorporate psychological safety in the organization. Maybe you've struggled with incorporating this into your organization. Maybe your culture was one way and now you want to go this way. I'd love to hear any kind of feedback on this. So share it in the ideas or in the comment section of wherever you found this recording or podcast, because I think I'd like to dive a little bit deeper on this.
Yeah. Okay, everyone. Well, thanks again for being with us and listening. Remember, building a team is the way to reclaim your freedom. Yeah. And of course, we're here to help you with our course community and our white glove service, where we find a rockstar VA for you. Now, of course, we don't just leave you alone. We have certain part of our course that helps you with this psychological safety. Yeah. It's the Thrive part that's really, really important. Yeah. But for now, we want you to do 3 things. Number 1, subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already done so, either on your iPhone or your Android phone or on your YouTube channel. Number 2, give us a rating, preferably 5-star. We'd love it. Leave a comment below this video. Talk about psychological safety. Talk about anything you want, actually. Just give us a comment. It helps get the word out. Number 3, go to HireMyVA.com for more information on our course and community and obviously our white glove service. Remember, even without experience, you'll learn how to prepare for hire and, what we talk a lot about in these episodes, thrive with virtual assistants. Yeah. Larry, we're helping a lot of folks. Looking forward to a couple of Q&As coming up, virtual spotlight sessions, and folks, come join us on those. So just go to HireMyVA.com for more information.
Yep. And I'm going to encourage folks, stop chasing success. Ugh.
Yeah, there you go.
Yuck. It's going to drive your life off a cliff is kind of how I always describe it, right? It's what it feels like when you're just chasing success all the time. But instead, I'd rather you seek a life of significance. Success is the byproduct of living a life of significance. So go do something significant today. All right. God bless you. God keep you, and God hold you. We'll see you on the next one. All right. Bye, folks. See you next time.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah.